Hey, beautiful. I know you're here because something inside you is exhausted. Bone deep, soul tired, exhausted from carrying around this invisible weight that follows you everywhere you go. The weight of wondering what everyone thinks about you every single day. You wake up and immediately your brain starts the familiar loop. What will I wear that won't make people judge me? How should I respond to that text so I don't seem weird? Will they think I'm trying too hard if I post that photo? And it never stops, does it? You're walking through your life like you're performing on a stage where everyone has front row seats and opinions about every single thing you do. The way you laugh, the things you say, how you look when you eat. Whether you're smart enough, funny enough, pretty enough, cool enough, it's exhausting because you're basically living two lives. There's the real you, the one with genuine thoughts and feelings and quirks and dreams, and then there's the you that you think everyone wants to see. The carefully curated, socially acceptable, people-pleasing version that's always checking the room for approval. But here's what I want you to know before we go any further on this journey together. You are not broken for feeling this way. This need for approval, it's wired into us as humans. Back when we lived in small tribes, being rejected by the group could literally mean death. Your brain learned to scan for social threats the same way it learned to scan for predators. So when you feel that spike of anxiety, wondering what someone thinks about you, that's actually your ancient survival system trying to keep you safe. The problem is, we're not living in small tribes anymore where everyone's opinion actually matters for your survival. But your brain hasn't gotten the memo. You're living in a world where you encounter hundreds of people's opinions every single day, in person, online, through social media, through the comments and looks and casual remarks that somehow feel like they define your worth. Your poor brain is working overtime trying to manage all these potential threats to your social standing, and it's stealing your peace. Think about the last time you posted something on social media. How long did you stare at it before hitting publish? How many times did you edit it? And then, after you posted it, how many times did you check back to see who liked it, who commented, who might be judging it? Or think about the last time you walked into a room where you didn't know many people. That split second where you became hyper aware of yourself, your posture, your facial expression, whether your outfit looked right, whether you should smile or look casual or seem busy with your phone. That mental energy you spend monitoring everyone else's reactions, that's energy that should be yours. That's creative energy, peaceful energy, joyful energy that's being hijacked by a system that's trying to keep you safe, but is actually keeping you trapped. I remember talking to a friend about this recently. She told me about spending 20 minutes crafting a simple text response to a coworker because she was worried about sounding too eager or not eager enough or too casual or too formal. 20 minutes for a text that probably took the coworker 3 seconds to read and forget about. But that's how it works, isn't it? You're over here having a whole internal conference about whether your response sounds right while they're probably already moved on to thinking about lunch or their weekend plans or that thing their mom said yesterday. Most of the judgment you're worried about, it's not even happening. But even when it is happening, even when people do have opinions about you, here's the thing that's going to sound revolutionary until it sinks in and becomes the most obvious truth in the world. Their opinions are none of your business. I know that might sound harsh at first, but stick with me, because this is where your freedom begins. Someone else's opinion of you is information about them, not about you. It's filtered through their experiences, their insecurities, their mood that day, their own stuff that has absolutely nothing to do with who you actually are. When someone judges you for speaking up in class, that says something about their relationship with confidence and visibility. When someone rolls their eyes at your outfit, that says something about their own style insecurities or need to feel superior. When someone dismisses your ideas, that says something about their need to feel smart or in control. None of that is actually about you, but we've been trained to take it personally, to collect these external opinions like they're facts about our worth instead of just someone else's thoughts that they're entitled to have, but that don't define reality. Tonight, that changes. Tonight, you're going to start learning something that will transform not just how you sleep, but how you live. You're going to discover what it feels like to have your sense of worth come from the inside instead of being dependent on the ever-changing weather of other people's moods and opinions. Because here's what I've learned, and what thousands of people who have walked this path before you have discovered: the people whose opinions actually matter, the people who truly love and support you. They love you for who you really are, not for the people-pleasing performance you've been putting on. And the people who judge you harshly for being authentic, those aren't your people anyway. You know that feeling when you're with someone who makes you feel completely comfortable being yourself? Where you don't have to monitor your words or worry about how you look or second guess every response. That ease you feel in those moments, that's what your life could feel like most of the time. Imagine waking up tomorrow and your first thought isn't about managing everyone else's perception of you. Instead, it's about what you actually want to do with your day. Imagine posting something because it makes you happy, not because you think it will get the right reaction. Imagine speaking up in situations where you have something valuable to contribute, instead of staying quiet because you're worried about being judged. Imagine making choices based on what feels right for your life, instead of what you think will earn approval from people who don't even know your full story. That version of you exists. She's been waiting patiently underneath all this noise of other people's opinions. She's been there all along, and tonight you're going to start meeting her. Over the next several parts of this journey, I'm going to walk you through exactly how this transformation happens. We'll explore where this need for approval came from in the first place so you can understand it with compassion instead of judgment. We'll discover the moment when things start to shift, when you realize most people aren't thinking about you nearly as much as you think they are, and how surprisingly freeing that revelation can be. We'll walk through the challenging middle part because I'm not going to lie to you, there's a phase where your brain tries to pull you back into the old patterns, but I'll show you how to navigate that with grace. We'll explore what it feels like when your internal compass starts to come online, when you begin trusting your own voice above all others. We'll talk about the small, daily acts of authenticity that build your confidence in being yourself. And we'll experience that pivotal moment, the day you stop apologizing for taking up space in the world just as you are. Finally, we'll settle into the peaceful resolution. What life feels like when you're truly free from the exhausting job of managing everyone else's opinions about you. But that's getting ahead of ourselves. Tonight, it's enough to simply acknowledge the weight you've been carrying and set it down beside your bed like an old bag you don't need to pick up again. As you settle into sleep tonight, I want you to imagine that with each breath out, you're releasing a little bit of that need for approval. You don't have to force it or make it happen. Just let your body and mind begin to relax into the idea that you are enough, exactly as you are, regardless of what anyone else thinks about it. You've been working so hard to earn something that was already yours. Your worth isn't up for debate. It's not determined by likes or comments or approving glances or whether people think you're cool or smart or attractive enough. You were born worthy. That little girl who came into this world, she was perfect and enough and deserving of love just for existing. That hasn't changed. All the opinions and judgments and social conditioning that happened after that, those were just layers that got added on top. But underneath all of that, that perfect worthy person is still there. Tonight, you begin the gentle process of remembering who you were before the world told you that other people's opinions mattered more than your own inner knowing. And tomorrow, when you wake up, you'll be one step closer to the version of yourself who moves through the world with quiet confidence, knowing that the only approval you need is your own. But first, we need to go back to the beginning. We need to understand how this all started, because you can't truly let go of something until you understand how you picked it up in the first place. The story of how you learned to care so much about others' opinions is probably more universal than you think. And when you hear it, you'll understand why your younger self made the choices she did and why your current self is ready to make different ones. That's where we're going next. Back to those early moments when seeking approval felt like the safest, smartest thing to do. Because understanding your story is the first step to rewriting it. Close your eyes for a moment and think back to when you were really little, maybe 5 or 6 years old. Can you remember a time when you didn't care what anyone thought? When you'd sing at the top of your lungs in the grocery store, or wear a princess dress to the park with rain boots, or ask strangers honest questions like, "Why is your hair that color?" without a single worry about whether it was appropriate. There was a time when you lived completely from the inside out, when your decisions were based on what felt good, what was interesting, what made you happy. You probably had strong opinions about what foods you liked, what games you wanted to play, what stories you wanted to hear, and you expressed those opinions freely without calculating how they would be received. That little girl knew something that somewhere along the way you forgot, that your own experience of life matters more than anyone else's opinion of it. So what happened? How did you go from that natural confidence to constantly checking over your shoulder for approval? It probably started innocently enough. Maybe you were drawing at the kitchen table, completely absorbed in creating something that made perfect sense to you. A purple sun, a house with windows that look like eyes, a family of stick figures holding hands. And someone walked by and said, "That's beautiful, sweetheart." And something in you lit up. Not because of the drawing itself, but because of that look in their eyes, the warmth in their voice, the way they stopped what they were doing just to notice you. That felt amazing, didn't it? Being seen, being appreciated, being told you did something good. So naturally, you wanted to feel that again. Maybe you drew another picture, hoping for the same reaction. Or maybe you noticed that when you helped clean up without being asked, the adults got that same pleased expression. When you sat quietly during grown-up conversations, you were called such a good girl. When you shared your toys, people smiled and said how kind you were. None of this was bad, by the way. Learning to consider others, developing social skills, wanting to contribute positively to your family and community. These are all healthy, normal parts of growing up. The problem started when the balance tipped, when seeking that external validation began to feel more important than listening to your own inner voice. Maybe there was a day when you expressed an opinion. Maybe you said you didn't like something everyone else seemed to love, or you were excited about something that others found silly, and instead of that warm approval, you got a different look. Confusion maybe, or mild annoyance. Someone might have said, "Don't be difficult," or "That's not very nice," or even just given you a look that made you feel like you had done something wrong. And your little brain, which was wired to keep you safe and connected to your tribe, filed that away as important information. When I express my authentic thoughts, I risk losing approval. When I lose approval, I'm in danger. Now, the adults in your life probably didn't mean any harm. They were likely just trying to teach you how to function in society, how to be considerate of others, how to fit in. But your developing brain didn't distinguish between this behavior is inappropriate and who I am is wrong. School probably amplified this. Suddenly, you were in a place where your worth was constantly being measured and compared. Gold stars, grades, being picked for teams, getting in trouble, being praised for raising your hand, or criticized for speaking out of turn. You learned that there were right answers and wrong answers, not just to math problems, but to how you should be. The kids who got attention were the ones who were funny in the right way, smart in the acceptable way, pretty in the way that everyone agreed was pretty. And if you were lucky enough to naturally fit those molds, you got addicted to the high of being approved of. If you didn't naturally fit, you started working overtime to figure out what version of yourself would earn that approval. Either way, you started living more and more outside of yourself, constantly reading the room, adjusting your personality like a radio dial trying to find the clearest signal. Then came the teenage years, and everything got turned up to 11. Suddenly, everyone else's opinions didn't just feel important, they felt like life or death. Because in many ways, socially, they were. Being accepted or rejected by your peer group could determine whether you ate lunch alone or with friends, whether you got invited to parties or spent weekends at home, whether you felt like you belonged anywhere at all. Your brain, still developing and trying to figure out how to navigate this complex social world, started treating social rejection like a physical threat. Because for most of human history, being rejected by your social group actually was a threat to your survival. So that feeling of panic when you posted something and no one liked it, that's your ancient brain trying to alert you to danger. That sick feeling in your stomach when you wore something and worried people were judging it, that's your survival system activating just like it would if you were facing an actual predator. The problem is, your brain can't tell the difference between the tribe might exile me and I'll die alone in the wilderness, and Jessica from chemistry class might think this selfie is trying too hard. And then social media came along and weaponized all of this. Suddenly, instead of worrying about the opinions of maybe a few dozen people in your immediate social circle, you had potential access to feedback from hundreds or thousands of people. And not just feedback, quantified, measured, comparable feedback. You could see exactly how many people liked your photo versus your friend's photo. You could watch in real time as people chose to respond to someone else's comment, but not yours. You could refresh and refresh and refresh, getting little hits of validation when the numbers went up and little spikes of anxiety when they didn't. It became like a slot machine for your self-worth. And just like a slot machine, the intermittent reinforcement made it incredibly addictive. But here's what nobody told you during all of this. Most of the time, the people whose approval you were seeking were just as worried about your approval of them. Think about that for a second. While you were carefully crafting captions to get the right response, other people were carefully crafting their responses to get your approval. While you were worried about looking stupid or too eager or not cool enough, they were having the exact same worries. Everyone was performing for everyone else, and nobody was actually enjoying the show. I remember talking to someone who told me about spending an entire semester in high school barely speaking up in class because she was so worried about saying something dumb. Meanwhile, she was convinced everyone else was smarter and more confident than her. Then years later at a reunion, she found out that most of her classmates had thought she was intimidatingly smart because she was so thoughtful about what she said. She had been editing herself based on her assumption about what others thought, while they were making assumptions about her based on her edited behavior. It was like a whole room full of people trying to dance to music that no one was actually playing. But we keep doing it, don't we? even when it doesn't make rational sense. You might catch yourself changing your order at a restaurant because you're worried the waiter will judge you for wanting something complicated, or laughing at jokes you don't find funny because everyone else is laughing, or pretending to like things you're not really into because it seems like the socially acceptable choice. And each time you do this, you get a little more disconnected from your own authentic preferences and opinions. Not because you're weak or doing anything wrong, but because you're a human being trying to navigate a social world that often seems to punish authenticity and reward performance. The tragedy is that all of this performing, all of this careful monitoring and adjusting and people-pleasing doesn't actually get you what you really want. What you really want, what we all really want, is to be seen and loved and accepted for who we actually are. But how can anyone see who you actually are if you're constantly showing them an edited version? It's like trying to find true love while wearing a mask. Even if someone falls in love with the mask, you know deep down that they don't really know you. And that leaves you feeling lonely even when you're surrounded by people who approve of your performance. Your younger self made the best decision she could with the information she had. In her world, approval felt like safety, and safety felt like survival. She was trying to protect you, to make sure you belonged, to keep you from being hurt or rejected or left out. She was doing the best she could, but here's what she couldn't have known then. What you're finally ready to understand now: the approval you were seeking from others was always meant to come from within. All those external voices you've been listening to, all those opinions you've been trying to manage, they were never supposed to be louder than your own inner voice. That internal compass, that sense of what feels right and true for you, that was never supposed to be overruled by someone else's preferences or judgments. Your authentic self has been there all along, underneath all the layers of people-pleasing and performance. She's been waiting patiently for you to remember that her opinion matters more than anyone else's. And the beautiful thing is, when you start living from that place, when you start making choices based on what feels true for you instead of what you think will earn approval, something magical happens. The right people are drawn to your authenticity like magnets. The relationships you build are deeper and more satisfying because they're based on who you actually are, not on who you think you should be. And the people who judge you negatively for being authentic, they start to seem less important, less threatening, less worthy of your mental energy. It's like that moment when you realize the monster you were afraid of in the dark was just a coat hanging on a chair. Once you see it clearly, it loses all its power to frighten you. Tomorrow night, we're going to explore that exact moment, the first crack in the illusion, when you begin to see that most of the judgment you've been so afraid of was just coats hanging on chairs. You're going to discover something that will fundamentally shift how you see this whole game of seeking approval. It's a realization that's both incredibly relieving and slightly shocking. Most people aren't actually thinking about you nearly as much as you think they are, and while that might sound a little insulting at first, it's actually the most liberating truth you could ever learn. You know that moment when you're lying in bed at night, replaying some interaction from earlier in the day? Maybe you said something in a group conversation and immediately regretted it. Or you wore an outfit that felt wrong the second you stepped outside. Or you posted something and then spent the rest of the day checking to see how people responded. Your brain turns it over and over like a rock tumbler, examining every angle, imagining what everyone must be thinking about you right now. You picture them going home and telling their roommates or their partners about that weird thing you said. You imagine them screenshotting your post to laugh about it with their friends. In your mind, you become the main character in everyone else's story, the person they're all analyzing, discussing, forming opinions about. But what if I told you something that might completely change how you see all of this? What if I told you that most of the time, people aren't thinking about you at all? I know that might sound harsh at first. Your ego might bristle a little at the suggestion that you're not the center of everyone's universe. But stay with me, because this is actually the most freeing revelation you could possibly have. There's something called the spotlight effect, and researchers have studied this extensively. Basically, we tend to overestimate how much other people notice and remember about our behavior. We feel like we're under a spotlight everywhere we go, when in reality, most people are dealing with their own spotlights. Think about your own experience for a second. When you're out in the world, at school, at work, at the store, scrolling through social media, how much mental energy are you actually spending analyzing other people's choices? Sure, you might notice things. You might have a passing thought about someone's outfit or comment, but how long do you actually spend thinking about it? And how often do you go home and have deep conversations with your friends about random strangers' social media posts or the way someone acted in class? Probably not very often. because you're busy thinking about your own stuff. You're thinking about that assignment that's due, or what you want to eat for dinner, or that conversation you had with your mom, or whether you should text that person back, or how you're going to pay for gas this week, or that thing you're excited about this weekend. You're thinking about your own life because, well, it's your life. It's the one you have to live in 24/7. And guess what? Everyone else is doing the exact same thing. That girl who you're convinced judged your outfit, she's probably thinking about her own outfit, wondering if people are judging hers. Or she's thinking about the test she has next period, or the fight she had with her boyfriend, or whether her skin looks weird in this lighting. That person who took 3 hours to respond to your text, they're probably not carefully crafting the perfect response or analyzing your message for hidden meanings. They're probably dealing with their own texts, their own responsibilities, their own life happening in real time. That classmate who didn't like your Instagram post, they might not have even seen it. Or they saw it while they were distracted and forgot to like it. Or they have a weird thing about only liking posts from their closest friends. Or their phone was dying. Or literally 1,000 other reasons that have nothing to do with their opinion of you. I remember the first time this really hit me. I was probably about 19, and I had worn this dress that I thought was cute when I left the house, but the more the day went on, the more convinced I became that it looked terrible. I kept catching glimpses of myself in windows and mirrors and feeling more and more self-conscious. By the end of the day, I was convinced that everyone I'd encountered had noticed how awful I looked. I was replaying every interaction, looking for signs that people had been judging my appearance. And then I got home, and my roommate, who had seen me leave that morning and had been with me for part of the day, said, "Oh, I love that dress on you. Is it new?" She hadn't even remembered seeing me wear it earlier. This thing that had consumed my mental energy all day, this outfit that I was sure everyone was silently critiquing, hadn't even registered as memorable to someone who actually cared about me. That's when it started to click. If someone who actually liked me and paid attention to me hadn't really noticed or thought about my appearance, what were the chances that strangers or acquaintances were spending any significant time thinking about it? The answer was basically 0. But here's the thing that's both liberating and slightly terrifying about this realization. If people aren't thinking about you as much as you think they are, that means a lot of the mental energy you've been spending on managing their opinions has been wasted. All those hours you spent crafting the perfect caption, agonizing over what to wear, rehearsing what to say, analyzing people's responses, worrying about how you came across, most of that energy was directed at an audience that wasn't really paying that much attention anyway. It's like spending months preparing for a performance and then discovering that most of the theater seats are empty and the few people who did show up are mostly checking their phones. When this realization first hits, it can bring up a weird mix of emotions. There is relief, obviously. The weight of thinking that everyone is constantly judging you starts to lift. You begin to see that most of your social anxiety has been based on overestimating how much you matter in other people's moment-to-moment experience. But there's also something that might feel a little like disappointment or even sadness. Because if people aren't thinking about you that much, it means you're not as important or as noticed as you thought. And there's a part of you that actually wanted to be important, wanted to be seen, wanted to matter. This is totally normal, by the way. Humans are wired to want to be significant in their communities. We want to know that our existence makes a difference, that people would notice if we weren't here. And here's the beautiful truth. The people who matter do notice you. The people who love you, who care about you, who are genuinely invested in your well-being. They see you, they think about you. They care about your choices and your feelings and your experiences, but that random person in your chemistry class, that stranger at the coffee shop, that acquaintance who follows you on social media but hasn't had a real conversation with you in 2 years, they're not sitting around analyzing your life choices because they're too busy living their own lives. And that's actually perfect. Think about it this way. Would you really want to live in a world where everyone was constantly monitoring and judging everything you do? Where every choice you made was being carefully evaluated by dozens of people who then formed lasting opinions about your worth based on those choices? That sounds exhausting for everyone involved. The truth that most people aren't thinking about you that much isn't a rejection. It's a gift. It means you have way more freedom than you thought you did. It means most of your choices don't have the high stakes you've been imagining they have. You can wear the outfit that makes you happy, even if it's not what everyone else is wearing. You can post the photo that brings you joy, even if it's not perfectly curated. You can speak up about things you care about, even if not everyone agrees with you, because most people will forget about it by tomorrow anyway. Not because they don't like you, but because they have their own lives to think about. But here's where it gets interesting. Once you start to internalize this, once you really believe that you have more freedom than you thought, something shifts in how you show up in the world. When you're not constantly monitoring everyone else's reactions, you can actually pay attention to your own experience. You can notice what you actually like, what actually feels good, what actually aligns with who you are. And when you start making choices from that place, from your own authentic preferences instead of from what you think will get the best reaction, something magical happens. You become more interesting, not because you're trying to be interesting, but because authenticity is inherently magnetic. When someone is genuinely themselves, not performing or people-pleasing or trying to manage impressions, there is something compelling about that. People can sense when someone is comfortable in their own skin, when they're making choices from an internal compass instead of constantly seeking external validation. And that confidence, that self-possession, draws people in. Ironically, when you stop trying so hard to get people's approval, you often end up getting more genuine positive attention than you did when you were working overtime to earn it. But here's the thing, and this is important. This isn't about replacing one strategy for getting approval with another strategy. This isn't about be authentic so people will like you more. This is about recognizing that your worth and happiness don't depend on other people's opinions in the first place. The goal isn't to figure out how to get people to think well of you. The goal is to get to a place where it genuinely doesn't matter as much what they think, because you know who you are and you're comfortable with that person. Now, I'm not saying you should become completely indifferent to how your actions affect others. Being considerate, kind, and aware of how you impact the people around you, these are still important qualities. But there is a difference between being thoughtful about how you treat people and being controlled by your fear of what they think about you. There's a difference between dressing appropriately for different situations and choosing clothes based on what you think will get the best reaction from others. There's a difference between communicating clearly and kindly and crafting every word to try to manipulate how people perceive you. When you stop overestimating how much people think about you, you create space to start thinking more clearly about what actually matters to you. You can make decisions based on your own values, your own goals, your own sense of what's right for your life. And here's something beautiful that happens. The people who are meant to be in your life, the relationships that are actually meant to last, those become stronger when you show up authentically. Because the people who love you don't want you to be perfect or to never have opinions or to always say the right thing. They want you to be you. And when you give them permission to see the real you, flaws and quirks and strong opinions and weird interests and all, it gives them permission to be real with you too. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Because even when you intellectually understand that people aren't thinking about you as much as you thought, even when you feel that initial relief and freedom, there's still a part of your brain that doesn't want to let go of the old way of doing things. Remember, seeking approval has been your survival strategy for years, maybe decades. Your brain has neural pathways carved deep with the habit of checking for external validation before making choices. And brains don't like to change their patterns, even when the new pattern would be better for you. So just when you start to feel free from caring what others think, just when you begin to taste what it's like to make choices from your own inner knowing, your old programming starts to panic. It sends up flares of anxiety. But what if they do notice? What if this time is different? What if you make the wrong choice and everyone judges you and you end up alone and rejected? Your ancient brain, which has been keeping you safe by making you seek approval, doesn't trust this new information. It wants to pull you back into the familiar territory of people-pleasing and external validation, even if that territory was making you miserable. This is where a lot of people get stuck. They have the intellectual understanding that they don't need everyone's approval, but they can't seem to break free from the emotional patterns that keep them seeking it anyway. They know logically that most people aren't thinking about them that much, but they still find themselves crafting the perfect text message, or changing clothes 3 times before leaving the house, or staying quiet in group conversations because they're worried about saying the wrong thing. The good news is that this is completely normal. The less good news is that knowing people aren't thinking about you that much is only the first step. Actually rewiring your brain to operate from that truth, actually living as if you believe it, that takes a little more work. But you're ready for that work. You're ready to move through the withdrawal phase, where your brain tries to pull you back into the old patterns. You're ready to learn how to sit with the discomfort that comes when you stop using other people's approval as a drug to make you feel okay about yourself. Because on the other side of that discomfort is a freedom that most people never experience. The freedom to be yourself without apology, to make choices that align with your own values, to live your life from the inside out instead of the outside in. That's where we're going next. Into the valley where your old patterns make their last stand, where your brain tries every trick it knows to get you back into the familiar cage of people pleasing. It's not always comfortable, but it's where the real transformation happens. And once you make it through that valley, everything changes. Okay, so you've had the realization. You understand that most people aren't thinking about you nearly as much as you thought they were. You felt that initial rush of freedom that comes with knowing you have more permission to be yourself than you ever imagined. Maybe you even tested it out a little. Posted something without obsessing over the caption. Wore an outfit because you liked it, not because you thought it would get the right reaction. Spoke up in a conversation without rehearsing your words first, and it felt good, different, like taking off shoes that were too tight or finally exhaling after holding your breath for a really long time. You thought, this is it. I'm free. I don't care what people think anymore. And then it happened. You posted something, maybe just a casual photo or a random thought, and no one liked it right away, or you expressed an opinion and someone made a face. Or you wore something that felt authentic to you and caught someone looking at you with what might have been judgment. And suddenly, all that freedom evaporated. Your stomach dropped. Your mind started racing. That familiar spiral began. What if they think I look weird? What if that post was stupid? What if I said the wrong thing? Maybe I should delete it. Maybe I should change. Maybe I should apologize. Welcome to approval addiction withdrawal. Just like with any addiction, understanding the problem intellectually is different from actually breaking the habit. Your brain has been getting hits of dopamine from external validation for years, maybe decades. It's used to that chemical reward system, and when you suddenly try to cut off that supply, it doesn't go quietly. Think about it like this. Your brain has been running a program in the background, constantly scanning for approval and validation. This program has been working overtime, monitoring facial expressions, analyzing response times to texts, counting likes and comments, measuring laughter after jokes, looking for signs that you're accepted and safe. This program has been your psychological security system. And like any security system, when you try to disable it, it starts sending off alarms. Danger! Your brain screams. We're not monitoring what people think anymore. How will we know if we're safe? How will we know if we belong? What if we make a mistake and no one tells us? What if people reject us and we don't see it coming? The anxiety that floods your system during these moments isn't just nervousness, it's your ancient survival system activating. Your brain genuinely believes that not caring what others think is a threat to your survival because for most of human history, social rejection really could mean life or death. So when you try to post something without caring about the response, or wear something just because you like it or express your authentic opinion, your brain hits the panic button. Not because there's actual danger, but because you're deviating from the safety protocol it's been running for years. This is why those first attempts at not caring what people think can feel so uncomfortable. You might experience physical symptoms, racing heart, tight chest, that sick feeling in your stomach. You might find yourself compulsively checking your phone, seeking reassurance, or second-guessing every choice. And here's where a lot of people get discouraged. They think, see, I can't do this. I'm too anxious. I do care what people think, and I can't change that. But what's actually happening is completely normal and temporary. You're not failing, you're detoxing. I remember going through this phase myself. I had decided I was going to stop editing my social media posts so carefully. I was going to just share things that felt genuine to me without spending 20 minutes crafting the perfect caption. So I posted a photo with a simple, honest caption about something I was thinking about. No careful wordsmithing, no strategic hashtags, no calculation about timing or audience, just authentic. And then I proceeded to check my phone approximately every 3 minutes for the next 2 hours. Each time I looked and saw that only a few people had liked it, I felt this wave of regret and anxiety. Maybe I was boring. Maybe people think I'm trying too hard to be deep. Maybe I should have gone with something lighter. I caught myself starting to plan my next post, something safer, more crowd-pleasing, more likely to get a good response. The old program was trying to reassert control. But here's what I learned. The discomfort you feel during approval addiction withdrawal is actually a sign that you're doing something right. It means you're breaking old patterns. It means you're choosing to act from your authentic self instead of from your people-pleasing persona. The anxiety isn't a message that you should go back to seeking approval. It's your brain's way of trying to keep you in the familiar territory that it thinks is safe, even if that territory was making you miserable. Think of it like learning to drive. When you first get behind the wheel, everything feels dangerous and overwhelming. Your brain is on high alert because this is new and unfamiliar. But the solution isn't to never drive. It's to keep practicing until the new skill becomes natural and the anxiety fades. The same thing happens when you start making choices based on your own inner compass instead of external validation. At first, it feels scary and wrong because your brain isn't used to operating that way. But the more you practice, the more natural it becomes. The key is recognizing the withdrawal symptoms for what they are: temporary discomfort that's part of the healing process, not evidence that you're making a mistake. But I won't lie to you, there will be moments when the pull back to the old way feels almost irresistible. You'll have days when you think, you know what, maybe caring what people think isn't so bad. At least when I was trying to please everyone, I felt more secure. Maybe I should go back to being careful about every choice I make. This is especially true when you hit what feels like social rejection or disapproval. Maybe you express an opinion and someone disagrees strongly. Maybe you wear something that gets a weird look from someone whose opinion you value. Maybe you post something that gets less engagement than usual. In those moments, your brain will offer you what seems like a very reasonable deal. If you just go back to being more careful, more strategic, more focused on what others want, you won't have to feel this discomfort. You can have that security back, and you might take that deal for a while. You might find yourself slipping back into old patterns, carefully curating your image, saying what you think people want to hear, making choices based on what you think will get approval rather than what feels authentic. This isn't failure. This is part of the process. Breaking free from approval addiction isn't usually a straight line. It's more like a spiral. Sometimes you move backward, but overall, you're moving in the direction of greater freedom and authenticity. The important thing is to notice when you're slipping back into old patterns and to be gentle with yourself about it. Instead of judging yourself for caring what people think, you can simply observe, oh, I'm doing the thing again where I check for external validation before making a choice. That's okay. Let me see if I can make this decision from my own inner knowing instead. One of the trickiest parts of this phase is that your brain will try to convince you that the old way was actually working better. It will point to times when you got positive feedback for people-pleasing behavior and say, see, people liked you better when you were more careful about their feelings. It will remind you of moments when you expressed your authentic opinion and got pushback and say, this is why we need to be more strategic about what we share. But your brain is a terrible historian. It has selective memory, especially when it's trying to protect you from change. It conveniently forgets about all the times you got positive feedback for being authentic. It forgets about the relationships that deepened when you showed up as yourself. It forgets about how exhausted and disconnected you felt when you were constantly performing for others. It also doesn't account for the quality of the attention you're getting. Yes, when you were carefully managing everyone's perception of you, you might have gotten more consistent positive responses, but those responses were to your performance, not to who you actually are. It's like being applauded for playing a character in a play. The applause feels good in the moment, but you know deep down that they're not really clapping for you. When you start showing up authentically, you might get less frequent validation, but the validation you do get is based on who you actually are, and that hits different. That satisfies something deeper. The friend who loves your weird sense of humor that you used to hide. The classmate who appreciates your thoughtful perspective that you used to keep to yourself. The family member who tells you they're proud of you for speaking up about something you care about, even when it was uncomfortable. This is the kind of approval that actually nourishes you because it's based on truth rather than performance. But your brain, especially during the withdrawal phase, has trouble seeing this distinction. It's like a person who's been eating junk food for years trying to appreciate the subtler flavors of healthy food. The junk food gives you that immediate sugar rush, but it leaves you feeling empty and craving more. The healthy food might seem less exciting at first, but it actually gives you sustained energy and makes you feel good in your body. The same thing happens with authentic validation versus performance-based validation. The performance-based validation gives you that immediate hit, but it leaves you feeling empty and needing more. Authentic validation might feel quieter, but it actually builds genuine confidence and connection. During the withdrawal phase, you're learning to appreciate these subtler, more nourishing forms of validation while your brain is still craving the quick hits of the old system. There's another challenge that comes up during this phase: other people's reactions to your changes. See, when you've been a people pleaser, the people in your life get used to that version of you. They get comfortable with you prioritizing their needs and opinions. They like having someone around who doesn't rock the boat, who goes along with what the group wants, who can be counted on not to create conflict. So when you start expressing your authentic opinions, setting boundaries, making choices based on what you want instead of what you think others want, some people might not love that change. They might make comments like, "You've been acting different lately," or "You used to be so easygoing," or "Why are you being so sensitive all of a sudden?" These reactions can trigger intense anxiety because they feel like confirmation of your worst fear, that people like the performing version of you better than the authentic version. But here's what's actually happening. The people who respond negatively to your authenticity are revealing that they were more invested in your people-pleasing behavior than in your actual well-being. They liked having you be accommodating because it made their lives easier, not because it was what was best for you. The people who truly care about you, on the other hand, will probably be relieved to see you start honoring your own needs and opinions. They might say things like, "I'm glad you're finally speaking up about what you want," or "It's nice to see you doing things that make you happy." But during the withdrawal phase, your brain will focus much more on the negative reactions than the positive ones, because negative reactions feel like threats to your safety and belonging. This is where you have to learn to trust your own experience over other people's reactions. If setting a boundary makes someone upset with you, but you feel more peaceful and authentic, you have to learn to trust that feeling of peace over their feeling of upset. If expressing your opinion creates conflict, but you feel proud of yourself for speaking your truth, you have to learn to value that pride over the discomfort of disagreement. If making choices based on what you actually want disappoints some people, but it makes you feel more aligned with yourself, you have to learn to prioritize that alignment. This is incredibly difficult when you're first learning to do it because your entire system has been oriented around avoiding other people's negative reactions. But it's also where the real transformation happens. Every time you choose your authentic response over the people-pleasing response, even when it's uncomfortable, you're building new neural pathways. You're training your brain that it's safe to be yourself, that you can handle other people's reactions, that your own inner knowing is trustworthy. And slowly, gradually, the withdrawal symptoms start to fade. The anxiety that comes with posting something authentic becomes less intense. The urge to check for validation becomes less compulsive. The fear of other people's disapproval becomes less paralyzing. Not because you've learned to not care at all what people think. That's neither possible nor desirable for most of us. But because you've learned to care more about what you think of yourself than what others think of you. You've learned to use other people's opinions as information rather than as the determining factor in your choices. You've learned to seek validation primarily from yourself, while still being open to positive feedback from others. And that's when something really beautiful starts to happen. That's when you begin to develop what you've been missing all along, trust in your own inner compass, the ability to know what's right for you independent of what anyone else thinks about it. But getting to that place, learning to trust that internal guidance system, that requires you to first sit with the discomfort of not knowing what other people think, not having their approval to reassure you that you're making the right choice. It requires you to make decisions in the dark, based on what feels true to you, even when you can't be sure how those decisions will be received. It requires you to discover that you are a trustworthy guide for your own life, even when, especially when, no one else is validating that truth. That's where we're going next. Into the quiet space where your authentic voice lives, where your real preferences and opinions and desires have been waiting patiently for you to remember that they matter more than anyone else's preferences about who you should be. There comes a moment, and you'll know it when it happens, when something shifts. You're faced with a choice, maybe something small like what to wear or what to post or how to respond to a text. And instead of immediately scanning for what other people would want you to choose, instead of running through the mental calculation of what would get the best reaction, you pause. And in that pause, you hear something you haven't heard clearly in a long time. Your own voice, not the voice that's been trained to say what others want to hear, not the voice that's been carefully modulated to avoid judgment or conflict. Your actual voice, the one that knows what you like, what you believe, what feels right for you. Maybe it starts small. Maybe you're getting dressed, and instead of thinking, "What will people think of this outfit?" you think, "What do I want to wear today? What would make me feel good?" And you choose the dress that makes you feel confident instead of the one that's safer. You choose the color that brings out your eyes instead of the neutral that won't draw attention. You choose comfort over what you think looks better to others. Or maybe you're writing a caption for a photo, and instead of crafting something you think will get likes, you write what you actually want to say. The thought that's really in your head, the feeling that's actually in your heart. And when you hit post, instead of that familiar anxiety spiral, there's something else. Something that feels like relief, like exhaling, like coming home to yourself. That's your internal compass coming back online. See, that compass was always there. Even when you couldn't hear it over the noise of everyone else's opinions, even when it got buried under layers of people-pleasing and performance, it never actually went anywhere. It's been quietly maintaining its true north, waiting for you to remember that its guidance is more trustworthy than all the external voices combined. But learning to trust it again after years of outsourcing your decision-making to other people's approval, that's like learning to walk after being in a wheelchair for a long time. The muscles are still there, but they're weak from disuse. You have to rebuild that strength gradually. At first, trusting your internal compass might feel scary because unlike external validation, which gives you immediate feedback, your internal compass asks you to make choices based on what feels right to you, even when you can't predict how others will respond. It asks you to believe that your preferences matter, even when they're different from what's popular or expected. Asks you to value your own judgment, even when you don't have external confirmation that you're making the right choice. This is terrifying if you've been using other people's reactions as your primary way of knowing whether you're okay or not. But here's what starts to happen when you begin trusting that inner voice. You discover that it actually knows things that the external voices never could. Your internal compass knows what makes you feel energized versus what drains you. It knows which relationships feel nourishing versus which ones feel performative. It knows what activities genuinely interest you versus what you think you should be interested in. It knows the difference between authentic confidence and the brittle kind of confidence that depends on other people's approval. It knows what your actual values are, not just what you think your values should be based on what would make you look good to others. Most importantly, it knows the difference between choices that align with who you really are and choices that align with who you think you should be. And when you start making choices based on that inner knowing, something magical happens. You start to like yourself more. Not because you're getting more external validation, though often that comes too, but because you're finally living in alignment with your authentic self. There's a particular kind of self-respect that comes from honoring your own voice. It's different from the self-esteem that comes from other people's approval because it's not dependent on external circumstances. When someone compliments the outfit you chose because it felt right to you, that feels good. But even if no one notices or comments, you still have the satisfaction of knowing you made a choice that was true to yourself. When you express an opinion that comes from your genuine beliefs and someone agrees with you, that's nice. But even if they disagree, you still have the integrity that comes from speaking your truth. This kind of self-approval is like having an internal battery that charges itself. External validation is like having to constantly plug into other people's outlets to keep your energy up. It works temporarily, but you're always at risk of running out of power if you can't find the right outlet. Self-approval is like having solar panels built into your system. As long as you're living authentically, as long as you're making choices that align with your values and honoring your own voice, you're generating your own energy. You're not dependent on anyone else to keep your sense of worth powered up. I remember the first time I really felt this difference. I had posted something on social media, not because I thought it would get a lot of likes, but because it was something I genuinely wanted to share. It was a photo of something I was working on with a caption about why it mattered to me. It didn't get a ton of engagement. In the old days, that would have sent me into a spiral of regret and self-doubt. But this time, I felt fine. More than fine, actually. I felt proud of myself for sharing something authentic, regardless of how it was received. That was the moment I realized that the approval I'd been seeking from others had been a poor substitute for the approval I could give myself. Other people's approval is conditional and unpredictable. It depends on their mood, their preferences, their own issues and insecurities. It can be withdrawn at any time for reasons that have nothing to do with your worth. Your own approval, when it's based on authentic self-expression and aligned choices, is much more stable. You have control over whether you're living up to your own standards. You know when you're being true to yourself and when you're not. But learning to generate this internal approval requires you to first get clear on what your actual standards are. Which is not what you think your standards should be, not what would impress other people, but what actually matters to you. This is harder than it sounds when you've been living from external validation for a long time. You might realize that you don't actually know what your preferences are in a lot of areas because you've been choosing based on what you thought would get the best reaction rather than what genuinely appealed to you. You might discover that some of the opinions you thought were yours were actually just borrowed from people whose approval you wanted. You might find that some of the goals you've been working toward were really about proving something to others rather than pursuing something that genuinely excited you. This can be disorienting at first. It's like decluttering a closet and realizing that half the clothes aren't even your style. You bought them because they were trendy or because someone else said they looked good on you. But it's also incredibly freeing because it means you get to start fresh. You get to discover what your actual preferences are, what your genuine interests are, what really matters to you when no one else's opinion is influencing your choices. And as you start making choices from this place of authentic self-knowledge, something beautiful happens. You become more interesting to be around, not because you're trying to be interesting, but because authenticity is inherently magnetic. When someone is genuinely themselves, when they are making choices from an internal compass rather than external pressure, there's something compelling about that energy. People can sense when someone is comfortable in their own skin. They can feel the difference between someone who's performing for approval and someone who's simply being themselves. And the paradox is that when you stop trying so hard to get people's approval, you often end up getting more genuine positive attention than you did when you were working overtime to earn it. But, and this is crucial, this can't be your motivation. You can't use authenticity as a strategy to get approval. because then it's not really authenticity anymore. It's just a more sophisticated form of people pleasing. The goal isn't to be authentic so that people will like you better. The goal is to be authentic because it feels better to live that way, because it's more aligned with who you actually are, because it generates that sustainable internal approval that doesn't depend on anyone else's reactions. When you're living from your internal compass, other people's approval becomes a nice bonus rather than a necessity. You can appreciate it when it comes, but you don't need it to feel okay about yourself. And when disapproval comes, because it will sometimes, you have a different relationship with it. Instead of taking it as evidence that you're wrong or bad or unworthy, you can evaluate whether it contains useful information while still maintaining your own sense of self-worth. Maybe someone criticizes a choice you made. Instead of immediately assuming they're right and you're wrong, you can check in with your internal compass. Does this criticism resonate with something true? Or is this more about their preferences than about whether your choice was right for you? Maybe someone expresses disappointment in your behavior. Instead of automatically changing your behavior to avoid their disappointment, you can ask yourself, was my behavior aligned with my values? Did I treat them with respect while still honoring my own needs? You learn to use other people's reactions as data rather than as the final word on your worth. This doesn't mean you become indifferent to how your actions affect others. If anything, when you're operating from your authentic self rather than from a people-pleasing persona, you're often more genuinely considerate because your kindness comes from a real place rather than from a need to be liked. But you stop making other people's comfort more important than your own integrity. You stop sacrificing your authentic self to avoid anyone else's discomfort. And as you practice this way of being, as you get stronger at trusting your internal compass and generating your own approval, you start to notice changes that ripple out into every area of your life. You might find yourself drawn to different activities, different people, different ways of spending your time. Not because you're rebelling against your old life, but because you're finally paying attention to what genuinely appeals to you. You might discover interests you never knew you had, or remember dreams you abandoned because you were worried about what people would think. You might find yourself setting boundaries that you never felt confident enough to set before, or saying no to things that drain your energy, or yes to things that excite you even if they're outside your comfort zone. You might notice that your relationships start to shift. Some people who were drawn to your people-pleasing energy might become less interested when you start being more authentic, and that might hurt at first, but you'll also notice that other people who appreciate the real you, start showing up. The relationships that survive this transition become deeper and more satisfying because they're based on who you actually are rather than on the performance you used to give. Your conversations become more interesting because you're contributing your genuine thoughts instead of just saying what you think people want to hear. Your creative expression becomes more unique because it's coming from your authentic voice rather than from what you think will be well received. Even the way you move through the world starts to change. There's a different quality to your presence when you're not constantly monitoring everyone else's reactions. You can actually pay attention to your own experience, what you see, what you feel, what you notice about the world around you. You start to inhabit your own life more fully because you're not spending all your mental energy managing everyone else's perception of you. But perhaps the most profound change is in your relationship with uncertainty. When you were dependent on external validation, uncertainty felt terrifying. Not knowing what people thought of you, not being able to predict their reactions, not having immediate feedback about whether you were making the right choices, that felt like being lost in the dark. But when you're operating from your internal compass, uncertainty becomes more manageable. You still might not know how others will react to your choices, but you have confidence in your ability to make decisions that are right for you. You develop what you might call inner certainty. Not certainty about what will happen, but certainty about your ability to navigate whatever does happen while staying true to yourself. This is the foundation of genuine confidence, not the kind of confidence that depends on everything going your way or everyone approving of you, but the kind that comes from knowing you can trust yourself to make good choices and handle whatever consequences arise. And as this confidence grows, as you get more and more comfortable trusting your internal guidance system, something shifts in how you see the whole game of seeking approval. It starts to seem kind of unnecessary. Not because you don't care about people or don't want positive relationships, but because you realize that the approval that really matters, your own, is something you have control over. You start to see that trying to earn everyone's approval is not only impossible, but also exhausting and ultimately unsatisfying. Because even when you succeed in getting someone's approval, it doesn't last. People's opinions change, their moods change, their priorities change, but your relationship with yourself, that's with you for life. And when that relationship is solid, when you know how to approve of yourself for making authentic choices, everything else becomes secondary. That doesn't mean you stop caring about having good relationships or being well regarded by people you respect. Sad, but those things become the natural result of living authentically rather than the goal you're constantly striving for. And there's something so peaceful about that shift. So much mental energy gets freed up when you're not constantly calculating how to get the best reaction from everyone around you. But we're not quite there yet. Because even when your internal compass is online, even when you're starting to trust your own voice and generate your own approval, there's still one more phase to move through. The phase where you take this new way of being out into the world in bigger ways, where you start making choices that might be more visible, more consequential, more likely to generate strong reactions from others. Because it's one thing to trust your internal compass when you're choosing what to wear or what to post on social media. It's another thing entirely to trust it when you're making decisions about your career, your relationships, your life direction, choices that other people have strong opinions about. That's where the real test comes. That's where you discover whether this new relationship with yourself is strong enough to withstand the pressure of other people's expectations and judgments. That's where you learn what it really means to live authentically, even when authenticity comes with a price that others don't think you should pay.